Okay, thanks for joining. My name is Rick Walsworth, and I'm joined here by an esteemed panel. What we're going to do is we're actually going to be looking at all things security, certainly as it relates in software-defined data center environments, but look really at some of the challenges, not only things that have come up in the news and the headlines lately, but also what can you be doing in your environments to be able to do that. But before we get started, I just want to go around the panel here and do quick introductions for our team. Bob, let's start with you.
First victim up, huh? I'm Bob Plankers. I'm a senior technical marketing architect. I deal with security and compliance stuff, explaining it to people, helping people understand it, helping different groups understand each other when trying to deal with it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining. And actually, I want to ask one non-work related fact about yourself.
One non-work related fact about myself. I enjoy gardening. I've got a bunch of raised garden beds, probably about 40 feet that direction. And I really enjoy that in the summer. And so after this, I will go out and water. So
there you go. Nice. All right, Ken Droy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ken. I'm a product line manager at VMware, and I am responsible for security for vSphere and VCF. And that means I do more of the same thing, many of the same things that Bob does, but internally facing. And I assume I have to also give you a non-work related. Yeah. So. I enjoy gardening. I'm not very good at it, but the chickens we planted last summer are growing nicely, and they're in fact I'm Bob's going to go water later. I'll go feed.
There you go.
That's right. I forgot you had chicken. That's really cool. Yeah, that's cool.
And then also joining us is Josh Townsend. Josh, quick introduction.
Yeah. My name is Josh. I'm a product marketing manager for Cloud Foundation. Got a pretty long history of working with VMware products, whether it's customer, partner, or as a VMware employee. So kind of seen it from all aspects here in the DC area where I live. Fun fact, though, in the DC area, I'm a volunteer firefighter and EMT. So when I'm not doing technical mumbo jumbo at my desk, I'm off riding fire trucks and saving lives.
Very cool. I bet you had an interesting year last year, given COVID and everything else. But we'll save that story for a
stay-at-home year.
Yeah. So I'm Rick Walsworth. I'm the group manager, product line marketing here at VMware. Much like Bob and Ken, I do enjoy gardening as well. What I actually do is I grow rare peppers, hot peppers. So everything from the ghost pepper across the whole spectrum. This year, I'm actually trying the death spiral, which is one that I usually make salsa with. And then I also grow essentially my own salsa, tools to be able to bring it all together. Yeah, so I make salsa and hot sauce as part of it. So last year was a rough year. Yeah, exactly. I think it works in really well with. So let's go ahead and get started. I mean, obviously, 2020 was a crazy year for so many reasons, but one of the things that we certainly saw was an increase in cyber attacks, really as a direct result of more people working from home, companies all of a sudden being forced to be able to support a distributed workforce, and things like ransomware attacks. Those are certainly in the headlines and whatnot. But I mean, just from your standpoint, Bob, what did you see that's really changed over the past 12 to 15 months as a result of the pandemic?
Well, there's been a lot of stuff, like there's this old joke about, is it the year of VDI, virtual desktops? And I think maybe last year was it, and is it now I actually own that domain. Is it the year of VDI? And for many years it just said no. And I changed it to yes. And it probably is, and so that comes with it. As you mentioned, all this working from home, organizations defended themselves like a castle, and there were moats and guards at the gates and things like that, tall walls, things like that. And now when you've got all of these people outside of the castle proper, you don't have a perimeter anymore. What happens? That perimeter itself becomes less useful. It's still useful, but it's not. You've got all of this stuff, and you're letting people come in from all of these untrusted places. Like do all of an organization's employees have a fully patched router? The answer is no, clearly. Like, in fact, I would say that a lot of places, a lot of people, their routers are probably actually controlled by criminal entities, let's put it that way. And because they don't patch and things like that. And so, so you're exposing an organization to a lot of that. And all of a sudden, information security teams and security operations teams have all of that to worry about now. And so that was the biggest thing. We've seen ransomware. I think the stat from 2019 to 2020, I just saw a stat. It was 435% rise in ransomware attacks. And I can't help but think that that they're related, honestly. So that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, certainly. What about you, Ken? I mean, what have you seen, certainly in your travels and talking with customers about, the rise in attacks in the past, 15 months?
I have to say, it sounds weird, but I'm kind of happy about all this ransomware in the news. Not for the obvious reason.
Yeah. It's a great boogeyman.
It's
get people to do stuff,
It's what we needed. The dictator's political playbook is invent a boogeyman. It's always the enemy. Here, we don't have to do that. Well, not that I'm implying that we're dictators, but increased awareness, I think, is probably the best tool in our toolbox. Security, all the, I used to work in fraud prevention, risk assessment, all these things are, today people, the way you should look at it is sort of like insurance, but people look at it as if it's a product. It's reactive, it's not proactive. With many things, it's fine to be reactive. You can fix a leak in your piping in your house when you detect it, and if you're lucky enough, it's not too late and you didn't lose half your house. If you're really paranoid about it, the right thing would be to use 4-inch copper pipes with 2-inch thick walls, so you can never have a leak. Obviously, that's never going to happen, but right. The right medium is to use the right kind of pipes and have leak detection in place. So with all this ransomware hitting the news, ransomware is nothing new. It's just different. Increased awareness, I would very much hope would lead to increased adoption of security tools and best practices, and customers, buying insurance instead of calling a plumber. Put in more things like better access control, a little bit of monitoring and management of your security posture. That can go a very long way. And if we'll see adoption there, go up, then we will definitely see an equivalent drop in breaches.
In the breaches themselves, right.
And the cost, yes, et cetera. Yeah.
Of course. And I just threw a link in the chat. There was actually research that was done recently by Carbon Black, and really kind of 3 things jumped up to my attention as part of that. 90% of security professionals say that attacks have certainly increased in the past 12 months. 94% of those organizations said they've suffered some sort of security breach one way or another. And then 80% of them say that the attacks have become more sophisticated, and they're concerned that their defenses are not enough to be able to address that. So I think these are really kind of startling facts, when you look at this, and Ken, based on what you said, and Bob, what you shared, is that, not only are the attacks becoming more pervasive, but you also have to worry about attacks coming from within, right? And I know a lot of times companies will test their employees, right? And that's kind of the theme of this discussion today, is that security is not just the CISO office. It's not just the security team. It should be everybody's job, right? And a lot of times I know internally our IT teams test us, right? They'll send out, what might look like essentially very innocuous messages, but then behind that, they're essentially trying to test the defenses. And I think it's good for people to be able to have that awareness, to what you said, Ken, to be able to have that awareness as a way to be able to help protect yourself. But once something happens on the inside, what else can they do? right? I mean, what else can you do? You know, once something happens on the inside, it's easier to protect the north-south attacks, but what happens when you're looking east to west? I mean, Josh, what are you seeing in terms of some of your conversations with customers about things become to protect the east-west traffic?
Yeah, you know, it's incredibly complicated, especially as we're looking at the decentralization of IT. You know, with hybrid clouds becoming more the norm, environments spread far and wide, edge locations, yet they're all interconnected. It makes it incredibly difficult to have a unified, comprehensive defense system. You know, because there's more exteriors, there's more castle walls, but there's a whole lot more internal avenues to travel. And so, you know, I'm hearing most people kind of are seeing them scratch their head and say, geez, I have no idea. You know, once we start thinking about how do we keep all this interconnected and have data flow and do all the big AI, ML, all the other cool stuff we're trying to do, have data enrich our business, but yet we have to control so much more. So really it's you know, that's what most are saying right now.
Yeah, that's why the zero trust stuff is really important. You know, there's this concept of zero trust, and it's not new. You know, people are hearing about it for the first time, but you know, it's a concept from I want to say like the late '80s or early '90s, and then there was an analyst, and I cannot remember his name. And sorry if you're watching, if you happen to be watching this and it's you, sorry, the John something or other, and that brought it up as part. I think it was Forrester brought it up. A decade ago again, you know, and the idea that we don't have a perimeter anymore, you know, the castle walls that you were talking about here, that, you know, Josh was saying lots more castle walls. Well, you know, what's the difference when you have lots more castle walls, you know, like this just, so can we do better when it comes to infrastructure? And part of that is turning down the trust, you know, like instead of turning security to 11, you know, turn trust back down to like 0. And why do we trust corporate Active Directory, for example? You know, it's a huge target for attackers, and you know, and it's got authorization, it's got authentication in it, all that sort of stuff. And so choosing wisely, I pick on Active Directory all the time because not because I don't like it. I think it's a perfectly acceptable type of directory, but people use it. Centralized directories are these big repositories of things, and you get into Active Directory, and in an organization with 100,000 users, you know, does anybody notice if one is compromised? Yeah, you know, and so that's the tricky part. It's both the weakest link sort of thing, you know, and these big targets, big game hunting, I think is what it's been described as, you know, and these big targets that hold a lot of stuff. And so, you know, and that's why this zero trust stuff has gotten such traction here, you know, really thinking about why we trust certain things. Do we really trust that storage array? Why do we trust Active Directory, you know, to do both authentication and authorization? Can we make a better choice about splitting that up? You know, those are the sorts of things that we need to think about.
Right. And you know, along those lines, you know, I certainly think, you know, last month when the Biden administration essentially put out a mandate that they're going to implement zero trust systems across the entire U.S. government, but what caught my attention in 60 days. Now, yeah, right. I mean, you know, that's pretty ambitious, even for the government. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think my thoughts could be summarized with my reaction there. Yeah, right. You know, the 60 days is not enough time for any organization to start and implement something that they're not already doing. They should be starting to think about it. They should already have been starting to think about this stuff, you know, but, you know, 60 days might be patching is a big thing. Being able to patch, being able to get that stuff. The executive order had a ton of stuff in it, you know, and zero trust was one of them. Zero trust is a design methodology. It's not, you can't just go buy zero trust from, actually, I'm sure you can go buy zero trust from somebody, but it's not zero trust, you know, like it's a design methodology. It's a way of doing things. It's a way of thinking about things. And so, yeah, to my point, you shouldn't, anything offering zero trust just as part of the product, you got to ask questions about it. Like products enable zero trust. You can build vSphere and VCF with zero trust methodologies, that sort of thing, and deploy them with that. But 60 days is not going to be enough time for that.
I agree. Zero trust is not a product, right? The reason you can't buy it is it's not something you sell. Zero trust is an architecture. It's how you build the factory, right? That's zero trust. It's how the factory is set up. So you can't just buy it unless you're buying a whole factory. So maybe like you're acquiring a company. But that aside, you can't buy zero trust. You have to design your systems. But back to the 60 days and the White House executive order, I think I could summarize it in 3 words: a good start. It doesn't matter if they're going to make their 60-day goal. That 60-day goal means one of 2 things. Either they're already well on their way to meeting the goal. They wouldn't have announced it if they didn't know they were going to meet it, or it means they're starting to think about it, and they probably won't make the 60-day goal, but it doesn't matter if they don't make it. It doesn't matter when, it just matters that you make it. So I think it's a good start. It creates awareness. Hopefully it's a model that will serve as a reference for everyone else to deploy and to copy and deploy.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue against the starts of conversations. We've been having a lot of great conversations with customers about zero trust. How do I do zero trust? What are changes we could make, in the very near term to help do that. Some of the things that I've been talking about, like separating authentication and authorization, so that if your corporate Active Directory isn't, or if it gets compromised, I mean, it is a big target, if it gets compromised, that, an attacker can't just log in, can't just add themselves to a group and log into your environments, like make it harder for the attackers to move around. So,
well, and Ken, to your point earlier, it's really that awareness, right? A year ago, you didn't have everybody talking about zero trust. So I think it brought that level of awareness up there. And certainly, it was interesting because I was looking at the timeline of the whole Colonial pipeline, right? So they got attacked May 6th. They shut down their systems. You had all this panic buying of gasoline, people pouring gasoline in a plastic bag. I mean, all this really bad behavior as a result of this. But then it was interesting and very controversial, by the way, that on May 7th, they paid the hackers. And so my question to you guys is that, and I said it's very controversial, but is that proper behavior? Because to me, that's just rewarding them for doing this. Obviously, they were in a compromised position, so they felt like they had no other options. But I don't know. Just to me, it just seems wrong to make those types of payments. Thoughts?
Yeah.
I like putting you guys on the spot.
I think the way it works, you look at any complex system. Even one that's governed by simple rule, right? You look at evolution. It's behavioral economics and evolution. Should you pay an individual company's decision to pay or not? I don't think is going to have much effect. What drives, like you said, it rewards them and it drives more attacks. That's when a critical mass of victims pay. What that critical mass is, I don't know. Ultimately, the decision is going to have to be everyone that gets compromised. It's going to have to be their decision on point, in context, in the moment, right? And they take all sorts of things into account, like this, for example, what's the impact, how much damage, and also things like recovery often doesn't work. You pay the ransom and there's a bug, it doesn't get decrypted. So it's a risk, it's a calculated risk you have to take. The unfortunate fact that there's been a data breach here involved is it's just that, it's an unfortunate fact, but the decision whether or not to pay should be made like any other risk assessment that you have. It is not illegal to pay a ransom. So therefore, there's no mandate. There's no, this is what you should do. Make your own decision. But I have to say, I hate that you have to pay. I hate this. right? And, I want to say I would never pay, but if I were in those shoes in that situation, I honestly don't know if I were the CEO of whatever, whether or not I would have paid. I will say though, if you're going to pay the ransom, or if you're going to shut down, or if you're going to handle it, do it for the right reason. One of these Colonial breach, I heard the reason they shut down wasn't because of safety concerns. It was because they couldn't keep their systems and their billing synced. So the risk they saw was nobody's going to pay us for all this product up. Wrong reason, right outcome.
But that's something you have to think about ahead of time, and that's, we're talking about the idea of getting this conversation started. Ransomware and this sort of thing should be built into business continuity plans, but
do you have a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan? Yeah. You should.
Yep. While you were talking here, I was thinking about, you do it for the right reasons. Things that stick out in my mind when you're paying a ransom is, you mentioned the decryptors don't work. And that's actually been a common complaint, and that the decryptors don't work at all. Or they get to, I've seen reports that one of them got to like a gigabyte worth of restored data and then it would crash. And that actually the security professionals ended up fixing the decryptor. The Colonial pipeline, as we don't know the internals or the whole story there. We just know what we saw in the news and that. But what I saw in the news was that they paid the ransom and then ended up restoring from their own backups anyhow. And so there's that. And then a stat that I saw this last week that something like 80% of groups that pay the ransom get attacked right away again afterwards. And you think about it, one, you're dealing with criminals. Okay. These are cyber criminals. They're not hackers. Let's not call them hackers. Hackers, that term is complicated. We'll just leave it at that. They're criminals. They're attackers. Some of them are other nation states, sanctioned by other countries in the world. And they're in business. They're big businesses. They employ, some of the APT groups, it's been said, employ thousands of people, 3,000, 4,000 people, and they're a big business. And so keeping that in mind, if they know you're vulnerable to something, they're going to hit you again, and they know you're going to pay. Why? Now you're just an ATM, and so just, that sticks in my mind when I see that news reports that people paid these things, that, they're in trouble. Unless they can act very quickly to defend themselves and to make sure that these attackers have been in their networks for a long time. That's the thing about these folks. They're very patient. They map out a network. It's the best penetration test an organization will ever have. There's an adversary sitting inside of the network, and you have to assume nowadays that, and this is the thing about zero trust, that we have to change our assumptions. And the assumption has to be that an attacker owns one of our user accounts in our corporate directories or whatever, and that an attacker owns something inside of our perimeter. Somebody somewhere inside of our organization clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked on, and now an attacker has control of that desktop and probably that user account. And that makes a lot of decisions different. Like, we can't assume that the castle walls are still effective in that model.
The right way to approach security is you have to do two things. On the one hand, you have to do everything you possibly can to make sure that your environment is trustworthy. And that includes setting up access control, fireworks, network intrusion detection, all the security systems you have. Do everything you can to protect yourself. That's one thing. The other thing is assume everything you just did was for naught, that you are totally, completely compromised and penetrated, and figure out ways to continue using your systems while they are compromised. So an example of that would be, you set up a firewall, et cetera, make sure nobody gets into your corporate network on the one hand. On the other hand, assume somebody got in, and within your corporate network, when you're connecting to something, use a secure channel. Don't just assume there's nobody listening in. So on the one hand, put in place all the protections you possibly can, and on the other hand, assume none of them work and take extra precautions. Right?
Right.
Asking yourself what happens if I can't use all of this stuff is a really interesting exercise. That's kind of a corollary to my favorite question when I was back in IT operations. What happens if it's all off? Like the really doing a tabletop exercise around that sort of thing is usually really instructive. And I'll just leave it at that. So.
There's,
I've seen. Go ahead.
Sorry, Bob reminded me. If you've read *The Stand* by Stephen King, it's like I think I read it 20 years ago. I don't remember the details, but I think there's some global flu or pandemic, whatever, wipes out the 99.9 whatever percent of the population, global population, and a few survivors are surviving, meeting each other, whatever. And there's probably some supernatural thing because it's Stephen King after all, right? But the point is, the survivors, they band together, they start to organize, and they start rebuilding critical systems. They start rebuilding infrastructures and power plants, et cetera, right? So that reminded me, Bob, you said, what if it's all off? Let's say the power grid shuts down. How do you turn it back on? We don't have a procedure for that.
Yeah.
In the book, one of the things he talks about is they do a test. They turn on a small power plant. Then all sorts of fires sprout up all over the city from people who left their toasters on before they.
That's a really good point.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a certain order of operations you have to be prepared for. Obviously, you can't prepare for everything, but asking these types of questions, what if everything's down? How do we turn back on? What's the right order of operations? How do we decide if it was a breach or if it was some other reasons?
Well, and this is another great argument for patching, because patching is just, I've always called patching just a series of small scheduled outages, right? And if you do patching regularly, you end up fixing a lot of the things that play into disaster recovery and rapid recovery from any sort of problem, whether it's an attacker or a loss of power. When you patch and when you automate that stuff and you're doing it on a regular basis, I feel very strongly that patching is one of the biggest things that organizations can do to their workloads, to their infrastructure, all that stuff, to keep attackers at bay and to limit their exposure to incidents, and so but it's got all of these other effects on disaster resiliency, readiness for disasters and stuff like that, because you've basically practiced having an outage and restoring service from it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. You've got all the little problems figured out. So
yeah, earlier in my career, we used to do a lot of tabletop DR tests where we'd essentially actually fail over from the primary site, and work with customers to fail over to the secondary site. Can they get up and operational? And you would be surprised just in the tabletop exercises, how many things went wrong. So, to your point, I think it's so important to be able to make sure you can exercise those skills, exercise that technology to be able to make sure that you could actually bring something up on the other side. So great segue here. Go ahead. Say that again.
This they regularly they even have a tool that regularly takes down live systems, real live systems. Yeah, you can control how much, I guess, of the infrastructure to take down. Don't dial it up too much. But they do this with live testing, and that's the best way you can test for this. We used to do this at one of my previous jobs. Whenever we had to deprecate something or remove something, we weren't completely sure how critical it was.
Shut it off for a little bit.
Well, you do what's called a screen test.
Yeah,
shut it off for a little bit and see
firewall it off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that, we joke, but this is exactly, Netflix and a couple of other big honchos developed tools for doing screen tests. So it is a critical part of your resiliency strategy.
So good segue. I want to kind of now switch a little bit and start looking more closely at some of the protective measures that IT shops can do. Right? We know we've already established there's a ton of threats out there, a million different ways, and getting more sophisticated in terms of how they break in. But from an IT shop standpoint, what should they be doing today to be able to do it? Bob, I think to your point, patching, right? I don't know why people don't patch, but patching is certainly one of the things they can
Patching is a giant nightmare on all levels, all operating systems, all applications, everything. I totally get why they don't patch, because it's just easier not to, and but it's We got to do better. We've got to work on it, and we've got to give feedback if an environment can't be patched, or there's well, Ken and I tell people all the time to let us know what you don't like. And, like we need to give feedback back to vendors about where it's troublesome, that sort of thing too, because we've got to up our game all the way across the board. And just being able to put into place systems that help us patch and identify when things aren't patched, when there's vulnerabilities. We're not talking a lot about products here, but the carbon black workload stuff where it can just assess all of your workloads, because it is a weakest link thing. Like what's the thing about workloads? Well, workloads are exposed to end users and to the internet and things like that, because that's how they work, right? That's how that sort of stuff goes. And so, knowing that your workloads are safe is a big thing. I really like that. And but desktops as well, protecting desktops, protecting there's a lot of perimeters or there are no perimeters. And so and then adding visibility, adding observability to everything. Would you know if an attacker is crawling around in your network? How do you know? Right. How will you be able to tell? Or can you build in choke points so that you can see them trying to get through? Can you start asking yourself, are there better ways? Why are we trusting things so much? Are there better ways to do this thing? Is there a way to make it so that the admins and the users can still do their jobs relatively unimpeded, but we can make it harder on the attackers to get along in our environments, and make it more likely that the attacker will be seen by a system or by a human somewhere along the way here, and that human can pull the fire alarm and actually do something about it. Those are big questions that I think people need to be thinking about.
And from an infrastructure standpoint, we tend to talk at VMware about intrinsic security, and just kind of curious, Ken, what does that mean to you when you hear the word, aside from a marketing word, when you hear intrinsic security, what does it mean to you?
Intrinsic security means security is everywhere. It's end to end. What I mean by those two things, end to end is vertical. So, for example, the stream you're watching live right now is in an HTTPS stream. So there's security flows. It's protected and it's completely confidential all the way from my computer that's encrypting the bits as they're being sent through the server to your computer receiving the bits is securely and decrypting them, and it's secure. It's end to end. The other thing is it's everywhere. All your systems, all your verticals, your HR system is secured with it properly end to end, and your operation system and your website and your service, whatever. So end to end, everywhere, and finally, it's on by default. You don't have to add it in later. It's the default. We used to have focusing on web connection for a second, but in general, anything that has security should be end to end, meaning it works. There's no it's fully deployed and operational everywhere, meaning it covers everything, and you shouldn't have to configure it after the fact. It's just deployed, and that's something that we're working on improving. So our products and our best practices, the recommendations that we come up with include that from even from before day one.
Right. And from a hypervisor standpoint, obviously there are certain advantages that are provided when you're able to virtualize the compute layer. What do you see as some of the key technologies that have come about over the past few years that have really kind of hardened that hypervisor core?
You're asking me? I think we are. Obviously, there's advantages to being in a virtualized environment. Things like isolation and being able to define applications and define affinity and counter affinity. and being able to move workloads around and put them in a secure place, make sure everything is set up properly and securely. But there's additional things that you can get. For example, I think we'll probably be talking about confidential containers or secure enclaves a little bit later. The idea of security used to be about asset protection, where when your most valued possession as a corporate entity was your buildings or your equipment. Today, it's more and more the data, and it's all about protecting the data. And we've known how to do this. We're very good at protecting data at rest. Files sitting on disks, we protect them by encrypting them. We protect data over the wire as it's being transmitted, so nobody can listen in. But the last place that we are not yet protecting is data in use. Computers used to be big and monolithic, and they used to run one application at a time. And then we have multitaskers today. You run many applications on the same computer. We do it on our desktops. Enterprises do it on their servers. So you have many applications running on the same computer, especially so in a virtualized environment. And you've heard of Spectre, Heartblade, all the side channel attacks where one application can sort of do tricks and peek into another application's memory and steal it. So the protections against these are patching your operating system, and on the one hand, and only running a single application on a piece of hardware is another approach that's not very scalable. And there's a third approach, which is encrypting your memory. And we're starting to see technologies emerge. The way it's built is effectively you're telling the CPU, carve out a section of memory that's encrypted that only the application running in it can see. Nothing else can see it. It has to be managed by the CPU. That's why the hardware vendors are the ones that are initially coming out with these technology implementations. And the idea is you have to write your application in a certain way so that it takes advantage of these secure enclaves. If you hear the security reports of criminals, whatever, terrorists, the FBI wants to decrypt their phones, and Apple says, "I'm sorry, we can't." It's because they have a secure enclave on the device, and the application is written in such a way that only that application can have access to those secrets. Even Apple, who made the device, can't decrypt it. So these are technologies that are starting to appear. There's various flavors of them. By and large, they mostly require you to write your application specifically for it so it can take advantage of those. But there's technologies we're starting to see, like AMD's SEV, Secure Encrypted Virtualization, that basically takes an entire virtual machine and encrypts it, and nothing outside of that virtual machine can see inside. The cool thing about that is if you apply that in a virtualized environment, the guest OS and especially the application doesn't need to change. In fact, it's not even aware that it's protected.
Right.
So, the cool thing is if I have an old legacy application that's unable to take advantage of these secure enclaves, I can just run it in an OS and chuck that OS inside of encrypted VM, and all of a sudden it's protected. So you can retroactively apply it.
And that's been VMware shtick for forever, right? Is that we can play tricks underneath everything that the applications don't even know. And that's actually what annoys app vendors all the time, and why you get the requirements for 32 CPUs and terabytes of RAM and all that stuff is because they know we're playing tricks underneath. But those tricks, everything. While you were talking, I was thinking about this, and every feature in VCF, every feature in vSphere is aimed at risk mitigation or reduction in some way. And because you mentioned affinity rules and all that stuff, EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility, the ability to smooth out differences in CPUs has been incredibly helpful from a security perspective. Not that you have different CPUs. Maybe you've got all the same CPUs, but as vulnerabilities are found, you mentioned hardware, the CPU vulnerabilities. You were talking about them here. Spectre and Meltdown and all that stuff really changed our assumptions about hardware. And Intel, AMD, you can't buy a CPU right now that doesn't have some form of CPU vulnerability in it. But what Intel, picking on them for a minute here, what they did to mitigate some of this stuff is they added CPU instructions to the CPUs themselves. Turns out CPUs are actually just code too and can be flashed. They've got microcode, and system firmware, system BIOSes can be updated. It's really important to keep that stuff up to date as well. And so what they do when they mitigate this stuff and they add a CPU instruction, well, when you're patching now as you patch, you've got a different CPU moving across your cluster. And so can you vMotion between them? Actually, in some cases, no. But something like EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility, we've been able to build that so that it takes that into account and can actually protect a workload and keep that workload running and safe, and also able to move back and forth until the whole cluster is remediated. And the tricks that we can play like that they're super powerful. And that's something we even have over the public cloud. The public cloud can't do that sort of stuff. And and so that's really cool. If we're talking about technology and that the hardware assists, trusted execution environments, the secure enclaves, those are really powerful too. But I will say again, you talked a lot about them and all the pros. There's some gotchas there too. Sure. Because you're keeping secrets from the hypervisor. The hypervisor is a process too, right? You're keeping a secret from the hypervisor, so the hypervisor takes its ball and goes home. And what goes home with it? vMotion, some of the other things. And so it becomes a design point. And but it's nice. You don't always. It's a toolbox. vSphere, VCF are really just toolboxes. They have all of these tools in there, and you use the right one for the application that you have, the situation that you have. You don't use a wrench maybe you do use a wrench to pound something in once in a while, but you try to use the right tool on the problem at hand.
Yeah. And are there any other best practices that yes, admins can do to be able to do that? What would you recommend? What are the top three? Put it that way.
What top three best practices? Oh boy. You were talking about putting me on the spot, putting us on the spot.
Like I'll help you out. I think number two, the second best thing you can do is keep up to date, patch.
Yep, I agree.
You're running the latest software. Number one is probably have good access control. So identity federation, multi-factor authentication. And number three, I don't know. Bob, you want to take it or?
Oh, well, I was actually gonna. So I'd like your number two patching, identity and access control. Good access control hygiene is really important. I'm gonna put that as a tie with number two. So maybe we don't have a number three. Number one, I look back at my days doing system design and operating these systems and that, and there's an old joke with storage admins that what's the best IO? What's the best kind of IO to do? Well, the one that you didn't have to do. The best kind of IO is the one that you don't do. The easiest thing to secure is the thing that doesn't exist. And so really thinking about what needs to be in your environment, why it's there, what it's doing, does it add value, that sort of thing. Getting rid of as much stuff as you can from your environments and paring it down to just the stuff that you need and you're sure you need. And, free tools, for example, open source tools, vendor tools, things that are purported to help you, they're free like a puppy. They always cost more than their initial purchase price. And so getting rid of that stuff, and then just the zero trust sort of thing. And this kind of fits in the access control idea. Why do we blindly trust all of the other enterprise systems when we're building out virtualized infrastructure? Why do we tell me why we trust Active Directory in our organization? Tell me why we trust DNS coming from that Active Directory. Tell me why we trust our time servers or our log collection systems. there should be good answers to those. How do you prove that those things are trustworthy? How are those systems? And this speaks to the SolarWinds thing and the supply chain thing. Why can we trust? Why do we know we can trust our configuration management system or our monitoring systems? Monitoring systems have unprecedented access to stuff, and SolarWinds was a giant wake-up call there, and so that's access control is a big one. Getting rid of stuff you don't need, huge in my mind, though.
I want to not caveat. I want to qualify that by saying it doesn't mean you shouldn't trust anything, right? All the security stuff is, to be honest, between us and whoever else is watching this.
Yeah, just between the four of us here.
Yeah. all the security stuff, it's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It's you're securing a system, but that system trusts and depends on another system, which depends on another system, which depends on another system. And at the end of all those systems, there's Bob. Do you trust Bob?
Well,
The answer is maybe you should. I like Bob. I trust him. He's a nice guy. You have to have trust. At the
what's
end
my price though?
At some point,
what
you have to trust.
What's my price though, Ken? There's that story from Tesla from a few years ago where a Tesla employee was offered millions of dollars by an APT group to plant malware inside of the Tesla systems, and they turned it down ostensibly because it's a better deal to continue working for Tesla, but everyone's got a price. What is that price, and how do we catch it?
Yeah.
So another thing to watch out for is maybe going to extremes, right? I think in Tesla they were lucky, but they did do the right thing. They have security systems in place that were good enough that the criminals decided to try to bribe someone instead of breach the system.
Social engineering's a big one, though. Penetration testers love dropping. Let's put it this way: never accept a USB device ever. Just that would be good advice for life. Yeah. You go to a conference, not that we ever go to conferences anymore, but all the swag that's USB devices, throw it away. And it's all compromised. Unless it came out of a blister pack from somewhere you trust and hasn't been in anybody else's. I mean, I'm paranoid enough that when I give a USB key to my wife, I don't ever take it back. I don't know where it's been, and that I don't want it in my corporate stuff here. And it's just so easy to pick this stuff up. Penetration testers, where I was starting with this, label a device. They put beach photos on it. Drop it in a parking lot. Somebody will pick it up and see what beach photos are on it. And boom, infected. End of story.
I once had a very good conversation with our IT guy when I was working at PayPal, and they left. One morning you show up at work and you get these gifts on your desk. It was a little USB device, and I looked at it in a secure way. I had a special environment. I took it over and looked at it, but it was our staff. They put USB thumb drives on everyone's desk. Inside on the drive was a PDF file that you opened, and it talked about how security is important. Don't let anybody tailgate. Don't do this. Don't click on links. And what was it? I think they had an internal link or an email or whatever you're supposed to click on or let them know you've opened the file to be eligible for a raffle for the prize. So I walked up to the IT guy and I told him it was lost on him that the people who responded were eligible for the prize should be automatically disqualified from receiving the prize.
Right. Exactly.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. But the point is you have to trust someone at some point, and it's a game. Going back to the Tesla story, they got lucky because apparently they pay that employee enough. But if the fraudsters were paying more, you can't pay all your employees $20 million salaries just so that they don't get breached, because then nobody's going to buy your product. So like with everything else, it's a compromise between extremes.
Yeah. So, we've touched on the hypervisor, certainly looked a little bit at storage, talking about encryption, how you can encrypt data at rest and in flight. What about networking? I mean, where does networking come into the security framework here? I mean, obviously there are things, Josh, like microsegmentation, and you've also got the ability to be able to leverage intrusion detection, right? So now I can actually embed, leveraging distributed firewalls, intrusion, detection and protection, prevention to be able to do that. So how do some of these technologies play in?
Yeah, it's not just intrusion prevention at the perimeter, right? It's at every VM, at every workload that we're supporting. That's some of the cool positioning of the hypervisor that Bob and Ken were hitting on earlier. More and more we're seeing customers get that aha moment and starting to adopt the NSX and other technologies within the VMware stack that allow them to place security that much closer to the actual workloads they're trying to protect. As that happens, zero trust starts to become a reality, not a pipe dream. Right? We're extending security to everything we care about. Every layer of the onion can make you cry. Right? You got to defend yourself from all of them until the cooking is done.
What about you, Bob? Any thoughts?
Well, the network is the computer, right? Let's just secure it like everything else. Flashback to I think the stuff behind me here is my ancient computers are rubbing off on me. But the network, what Josh was saying about, being able to see all of it, it's about visibility, and the network gives us that visibility. We've got the ability to do I haven't played with it enough. The NSX, the intrusion detection and prevention parts of it, I really want to get into that. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff there, because how do you tell if an attacker's crawling around in your network? How are you able to see that it's happening? What choke points? The network is where you form choke points to really control access. Ken and I have been talking about use of VPNs inside organizations to help protect things and protect management interfaces and stuff like that. And can we add control points there that are monitored and logged and have additional security, two-factor authentication on them, multi-factor authentication, whatever, I guess you could have 3 factors if you wanted. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and the network is a big piece of it. So
the network's not all bad, is what you're saying.
No, I've actually, I kind of get along with the network.
Same roads that allowed COVID to spread early on are the same pieces of infrastructure, planes, trains, automobiles, that are taking the antidote, right, the vaccine out to everyone. And
nothing is purely good or evil in this world. Like it's all just a tool in the toolbox. And do I let the attackers play with the tools in my toolbox, or do I use some of those tools to
play with them?
Well, that's the thing too. You could actually, hack them. Well, maybe not hack them back. I think that's a terrible idea. But but playing with them, honeypots, canaries, those I've been messing with those a lot lately. Like putting stuff out on your network that nobody touches, and if somebody does touch it, it sends alarms. That's actually a really interesting concept to me, because it's not a security control per se. Ken and I actually have had a long conversation about this, and he's smirking there. But it's not a security control per se, but it's a way to discover something, And I think of if you've ever read the book The Cuckoo's Egg, Clifford Stoll. The Cuckoo's Egg is a great example of that sort of level of a detection. In his case, it was a Multics box or a Unix box, early Unix box, or a VAX or something like that back in the day in an academic environment in California. But the same sort of thing. Can we see if an attacker is roaming around in there? And so, yeah.
Any thoughts, Ken?
Yeah. I was thinking, it takes me back to what we were talking about earlier about, we said security is a team sport. And I was just looking at a slide I was preparing for later, where I have a similar quote. I have Bruce Schneier's "Security is a process, not a product." What I'm getting at is, the network It's a tool. You can, like you said, our travel networks are good at getting supplies and people and goods around, but they're also good at getting, viruses around and undesirable rats and other undesirable things. They have undesirable side effects like, I don't know, global warming, whatever, congestion in the skies, a plane could fall on your house. It's a risk. Everything is a tool. Nothing is completely black and white, but use it to your best advantage, right? The quote about going back to, there's no tool or product or whatever, there's no magic solution. You can't just buy a solution. You can buy tools, and the tools are good for something, but not good for something else. And they also have side effects. So I know it's a cop-out and it's kind of a lousy weaseling out of an answer, but the answer is always, it depends. And
that would be IT's motto,
figure out what's best for you. Security is a process, not a product, according to Bruce Schneier, and not wrong.
Back in the year 2000, that was too,
No, that's a really old.
A long time ago. We're finally just kind of figuring it out, So
and
21 years later,
security is in Google like one of the top 5. Some of the top 5 autocompletes you get is security is a team effort, security is a process, not a product, security is job 0, that type of thing. The point is, it's a team effort. You have to start early, and you will never be 100% completely secure. You have to strive to be as secure as possible, with the understanding that complete security is not achievable.
Well, it's a trade-off, right? Security is always a trade-off. And you're usually trading off usability. Somebody's gonna hate that security control that you're turning on right now. And it can be a conversation. It should be a conversation, especially when it comes to compliance. People conflate compliance, which is a business requirement, and security, which is not it is a business requirement, but it's ongoing. But security is always a trade-off, and you're trading off other stuff, and where I was going with the compliance thing is that there's always an idea of compensating controls that, if you turn one control down, you can turn other ones up, maybe that aren't so onerous. And you play with those trade-offs, and what's the right solution for an organization. Turning security to 11 is rarely the right choice for an organization, because it hampers their actual mission. And security is always overhead too. An organization, it's more like an insurance policy. You pay the insurance policy, but you hope you never have to use it. And but that's money. The more money and time you spend on security, the less time, it's an opportunity cost. The less time you have and less money you have to spend on moving your organization forward. That's why, we talk a lot about trying to make this stuff easy to use and turn it on by default and things like that. Expressly so, people don't have to spend time on it, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, and it goes back to what Ken was talking about earlier, right? Intrinsic security should be there. It should be turned on by default. Obviously, you have to customize it to your own environment to be able to make sure that it works for your organization.
If you want to turn it down, if you want to turn security down, fine. I often joke that no security plan, no compliance effort has ever survived contact with a real application. And so if you want to turn it down, or turn it down in a very specific portion or manner or whatever, fine. I think having the flexibility to do that is great. But out of the box, not that we have boxes, but out of the box, it should all be on. It should all be full blast, So
turning security up to 11 to make. I'm a fan of bad analogies. So to make a really good bad analogy, if you were to turn up security on your car to 11, you would need 3 sets of locks to get in, and once you get in, you'd have to have like a roll cage and wear a helmet and protective suit and padding, and you can only go 3.5 miles per hour and 25 airbags for each passenger. Right, that's turning security up to 11. Good luck going to the grocery store and getting milk. With
right.
But you turn the security dial down to a reasonable level, and then
you find where your risk and all that stuff.
So for cars, that means, you know, having a lock, maybe a keyless entry, airbags, and
airbags. Yeah.
That takes care of 99.9%. You know, it doesn't mean you won't die in a fiery crash, but it significantly reduces your odds. So security doesn't have to be at 11. It has to be up where it makes sense. I think last year or the year before, Google did a quick study where, what was it? I think just prompting you for your password or adding multi-factor authentication, even if you don't actually do it, just showing a dialogue that says, you know, starting next month, we'll have multi-factor or something like that. Just putting in the basic requirements stopped probably 90% of attacks, manual attacks, and 100% of automated attacks. So it doesn't mean you won't get breached, but just having something simple like prompt you for a password when you haven't logged in for more than a day or two is super effective. Go with the low-hanging fruit. You will get a lot more bang for your buck. But look at your particular situation and ask yourself, is that low-hanging fruit enough? After these recent breaches, I can't say whom, but one of the parties affected pretty much contacted us and told us, what's the quickest, cheapest, smallest thing we can do to protect ourselves in light of these attacks? And our response earlier, you're not thinking about this the right way. You've been breached. You don't look at the cheapest, quickest thing now. You look at the most effective, fastest, thing you can do to get back, and then you have a long, hard look at your security practices and what got you into this mess in the first place.
Exactly. So, gentlemen, we are up against time. I know we were going to kind of cover compliance, but I think that's probably a whole other discussion on its own. Maybe we can invite Jerry Brode for that discussion. But I do want to thank you for your time. This is a great session. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say,
if
you're interested in compliance, go out to core.vmware.com. We've got some great resources out there for compliance and for security. And so I'm sorry, Rick, I cut you off. So now you can.
No, you're perfectly fine. No. This has been a great session. Bob, Ken, Josh, really appreciate you guys taking the time. I thought this was again, very candid discussion. But thanks again, and look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, cheers.